So I'm gonna welcome the first set of speakers here. So who do we have? We have Bethany and Travis, and from PandaDoc, and they have been doing something interesting with their LinkedIn page, with their podcast, things like that. So please join me on the stage here. Join me on the stage here. Oh,
What's up,
love
guys?
that.
What's up, Pete? Hey, Bethany.
Oh, it's Pep,
Hey,
actually.
Trav.
Pep.
Hi,
not
Pep.
Oh, Pep.
Only happens 20 times a day. No worries.
It's okay. I get called Tyler every day of my life.
Okay, cool. Well, I love the outfit. I wish I would have, prepared wearing a panda suit as well. You guys are on brand, obviously.
We try, yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, I just checked out your LinkedIn page. 50-something thousand people in there, right? This is like amazing job. I have a podcast. You guys have a podcast. You're doing some interesting stuff. I can't wait to hear exactly what you're doing. So the stage is yours. Take it away. I'll hop back in about 30 minutes.
Bethany, while I'm getting the screen share ready, why don't you give people just an overview of what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I want to introduce myself. Hi, guys. I'm Bethany Fagan. I'm our senior manager of content marketing here at PandaDoc. I've been with the organization 6 years, which is wild and fun and crazy and awesome all at the same time. And we are here to chat with you guys just about our podcast. And essentially, if you follow anything on LinkedIn, everybody and their mom has a podcast show, right? So we're here to kind of tell you a little bit more about how the show came to be, our current state of where we are with the show, and then do a little forward looking as well, give you guys some intel into what we've learned and where we're hoping to progress in 2022 and beyond. So yeah, really looking forward to kind of giving you guys our secret sauce a little bit, and hope to also give you guys some clear takeaways and resources that you can apply to your business and what you're doing, and maybe explore podcasting for you and your organization. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that intro. Yeah. I'm Travis. I am the guy in the panda suit. I've been with PandaDoc for about 3 years. And I've had the blessing of working with Bethany and having her help me get this podcast started and launched about a year ago. And if you haven't heard about it, the Customer Engagement Lab, if you follow me, Bethany, or PandaDoc on LinkedIn, you will never miss an episode. And yeah, as soon as I get my settings here, I'm going to share my screen real quick. This new Mac OS update is making me give permission to this. So give me just one moment while I get that ready.
Okay, so while he's getting his shit together, why don't you tell us about your LinkedIn page? You guys have a bunch of followers. How'd you go from 0 to wherever you are?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple of different things, honestly. It's one, we were actually applying our content strategy to social media, right? We didn't really have a social media plan. We were just kind of producing content and then putting it up on the website and hoping for the best. I had seen some ticks up in our organic traffic from social, and I knew that we needed to double down and kind of do some more strategic social moves. So we really came up with a social media strategy, which was not only consistent posting, but then coupled with employee advocacy as well. So I had noticed that a few of our sales reps had been becoming a little more vocal on LinkedIn. They had been sharing their sales tips and their tactics and their hacks and, their day-to-day frustrations in life of a sales rep, right? And I think this kind of helped people gravitate to the PandaDoc brand. So not only were they following our sales team, they wanted to learn more about our brand and the PandaDoc brand, right? I think we also did get some momentum from our own company announcements. In September of last year, we raised another round of funding. And checked that beautiful unicorn box off on our list, which is great. And so now I feel like we've really just been getting momentum from that activity, right? It's a steady drumbeat of content on our own LinkedIn page, coupled with really getting our pandas and our employees sharing that content on their own personal pages. And, now we're kind of exploring new avenues as far as more video content or trying to get groups of employees together to be sharing content. So yeah, that's kind of where we're looking to go with it. But,
all right. So
now we're back in action. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Pep. Okay, Trav. So I think we wanted to start with again our kind of our podcast launch story. I'm going to just jump right into it since we're running a little behind here. Again, we had done a lot of the traditional content marketing tactics, right? We had written some ebooks and done some white papers and, our gaming SEO and kind of trying to be more strategic with SEO. And at the time, our former VP of marketing kind of came to myself and Travis and said, what if we go beyond the written word? How do we do more digital content? And I was living in Brooklyn, New York at the time. And shout out to Caitlin. She had actually started her own podcast network. Okay. So she was running a lot of shows for women in business or female driven audiences. Right. And I went to her and I said, we're thinking about doing a podcast, but do we start our own or do we join a show? What's the easiest way? And she's like, well, to be honest, there is no easy way. There's, you could go one of two paths. She's like, but a B2B organization like yourself, I would definitely try to attach yourself to a show first and see how that goes, kind of do some test driving a little bit, and try to get an audience, right? And build your audience there. So we joined the B2B Growth Show, which is by Sweetfish Media. If you guys don't know who they are, please follow our friends at Sweetfish. They're instrumental in a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. But they let us co-host the B2B Growth Show, and that's kind of where we started. So Travis, I don't remember how many B2B Growth Show episodes we ended up doing before we went our own way. But, once we kind of got our bearings a little bit, we're like, you know what, we can do this. We can start our own show. And, it doesn't have to be like the Panda Doc podcast show, but we can brand it something that our audience loves and would love to hear from us and share content on not only what we call like drinking our own Kool-Aid, right? But also trying to create content and topics that our audience cares about. So yeah, it's kind of the backstory a little bit. Trav, I can't hear you, bud. Okay, I'm gonna go into a couple of these tactics while Travis gets his mic back up and working here. Like I mentioned, we had kind of gone into this foray of creating our own show. So how did we do this, right? We took assessment of our current audience. Again, once we had amassed a decent following on LinkedIn and our other social channels, and forgive me, I don't have exact numbers. That's when we knew that we had somebody who cared enough about what we were going to say, right? And that's when we really kind of launched the customer engagement lab. We also knew that since we were kind of exploring new territory, we didn't want to, spend too much money, right? So it's okay to start cheap, start scrappy. I think Travis recorded the first episode on his phone, on his iPhone, and also at the time in an apartment that was rented by some of our leadership team when they would travel to Florida. So we really, scraped the pennies together to kind of start the show and get it going. Then we recorded a couple proofs of concept. I should also mention too, we worked heavily with Sweetfish too, on a couple of different exercises to name the show, create a premise for the show. What was our mission and vision for the show? So again, it was real fun to kind of work with them on like, what are we even going to call this thing? And what are we going to do? And then we recorded a couple proofs of concepts just to get leadership buy-in, which was probably a real tricky part for us, right? But I can go into more of that in a little bit too. But yeah, we launched the concept. Again, I did kind of more of the legwork around getting executive buy-in. I think the other challenging part for us too, and I think something of note for really important people was we really wanted to create a narrative where the point of the podcast was not for pipeline creation. It was not for generating leads. It was not for, any kind of super specific, marketing metric, right? We knew that the podcast was going to help grow our brand, and it was going to be difficult to always tie it back to results. But we knew that what we cared about was just getting social engagement on the posts for the content. So again, likes and comments, and then just making sure that we were getting listeners and streams consistently and growing that consistently each episode and then quarter over quarter. So yeah, that was hard to overcome the executive buy-in, but once everybody was on the same page of us doing that, then it worked for us. So Trav, please tell me your mic is working.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Well done, Bethany. Way to handle that slide while we were having technical difficulties. It's always fun, right?
Yeah.
The only thing I wanted to add in here, guys, is we're going to share this slide deck afterwards. There's only so much we can cover in 20, 25 minutes. There's a lot of awesome resources in here that we put together for you. Everything from how we named the show and tips that Sweetfish Media gave us for a whole formula of how to name your podcast and start a show. I think that's a really important one. One thing I'll always remember is they always said, don't have the word podcast in your podcast name. It's just like a big no-no. And little things that I didn't realize when I was getting started too. But yeah, I mean, Bethany, I think it would be cool for the audience to hear, because this is a question I get a lot, and we'll go back to the slides in just a minute. Executive buy-in, because a lot of people are like, yeah, I want to start a podcast. I want to do fun stuff like PandaDoc is doing. What sort of resistance did you get, or like hesitation, and how did you navigate those conversations?
Yeah. So, and I also want to get to Stephanie's question too, because I think it's a good one. So for me, it was really about, I think we were also kind of fortunate in the sense that we already had a pretty strong inbound funnel, right? We were already seeing a good amount of traffic and leads from other marketing channels. So, but we were also seeing where at some point that well is going to dry up, right? And that we know that we can only create demand for so long and so far. So we were also, I feel like, feeling very like we were just pushing the product, and not so much talking about our mission and vision and our values and the value that we give to our audience, right? So for me, it was really about convincing our leadership team that we have to go beyond some metrics and some numbers to build a PandaDoc brand. And we had also seen some pretty good early traction with PR and some other folks that were kind of doing some of these hard to measure kind of brand initiatives. So again, that was kind of, we were fortunate in the sense that we could afford to take this risk in a way, because we had already a couple of strong marketing channels figured out. And this was a test and a risk for us to kind of go for it. And I think our leadership team at the time was willing to take that risk, and they know how important brand is. And again, we were seeing strong, consistent followers on LinkedIn. Leadership was also seeing more, again, employee advocacy happening and the power of that, because it was resulting in some organic web traffic for us. So that means that we can potentially spend less on paid social, right? And spend less in some other channels by investing in this podcast piece. So, yeah.
Did you want to answer Stephanie's question?
Yeah. So, I will say proof of concept, and when didn't have subscribers, it was difficult. But this is where we really worked with Sweetfish to kind of establish our, how do we take our company mission and vision, or maybe our marketing strategy, and apply it to a theme of the show, right? So we already knew what was working on social in some ways, right? We had some kind of proof of concepts on social media as far as like content that we were sharing, or like what kind of subjects were getting engagement from our employees. And that was helped us in kind of estimating the impact for us. So yeah, I definitely remember that exercise, right, Travis, that we did with Sweetfish. It was like, okay, well, what are we trying to what's our stake, and like, what are we trying to show our audience, right? And it was really about, our founders created PandaDoc to make the customer experience better, right? So that's where we got, how do you engage with your customers, right? Customer Engagement Lab. So, and again, we had already kind of tested some of that content on our social channel to kind of get that proof of concept and get that buy-in. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, what was most important as well was to get across the message from me to Bethany to our head of marketing, all the way up to the very top of the executive staff, that this is a brand building exercise, so that we weren't setting expectations that like, yo, we are going to close so many more deals from this podcast. Like, that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to have one-to-one ROI and revenue expectations set on this podcast. Like, no, this is an audience building activity, because we see the value as an organization in our audience on social media platforms. For many that are, researching, what Pep said earlier, when they're looking at different tools, they're looking at different brands, at the end of the day, one of the ways to differentiate yourself is through brand building activities. And we saw that there were some personalities, mine included, that could really kind of bring to life one of the most important core values at PandaDoc, which are learn and have fun. And that's what we set out to do with the podcast. And when we kind of brought it back to the core values of the company, everybody was like, cool, we're on board. As long as you're not spending any money out of the gate, let's do this thing, like not any extra money. And so, yeah, that would be my tip. Number one tip is like, start cheap and be scrappy. I showed an absolutely terrible recording of what I had in mind to the entire team and said, give me your feedback now before we launch. And that's what we did. All right, I'll go back to sharing my screen real quick. I think it's good for people to see us and go back and forth anyway. And yes, very meta for us to experience technical issues. That was a good call out in the chat there. So the next is like, where is our podcast at today? We've been doing this for almost 2 years, right? We were on the B2B growth show. Then we launched our show about 15 months ago. So where the heck are we today? And why should you even be listening to us? Like what makes us subject matter experts in podcasting? Well, we've got over 25,000 downloads. And if you know anything about podcasts, downloads is one of the metrics you really want to pay attention to. It's the equivalent of a stream, if you will. It's the podcast lingo for somebody that actually listens or watches your podcast. And since we are a video and audio podcast, we do have all of our episodes up on YouTube and Wistia. And that's part of our strategy from the get-go. But yeah, Bethany, what are some of the major things that you're seeing in where our podcast is today, and like what it's achieving and what it stands for?
Yeah. So I'm proud that we've made the switch from, again, we're grateful for Sweetfish for helping us, get off the ground and running. But now I'm really glad that we have brought all of the production in-house. So once we were able to kind of figure out, the cadence of content, and then how much work was going into it, and kind of taking assessment with Travis on, hey, where are you spending your time? And then I have a couple of other content folks on my team. How do we divvy this up a little bit better and still produce great content, but kind of bring it in-house to kind of get our costs and kind of have more control over what we're producing. So that's where we are today. We've upgraded to a nice, brand new, amazing studio. Shout out to Coastal Creative in St. Pete, Florida. Again, where we are today is really one, controlling, again, the episodes, the content, and then two, I think now that we have gotten into a good practice and know what to expect, it also allows us to really making sure that we're creating that content, not just on the podcast, but then repurposing that content everywhere else. How do we create blog posts? How do we create more videos on YouTube? How do we slice and dice it for our demand gen team to kind of do some performance marketing? Whereas before we were just running so fast and running so quick that we were just producing a show and then it was kind of like set and forget, right? We weren't really doing too much with it afterwards. So now it's good for us to kind of, again, be able to repurpose that content into many different content channels that are a little more trackable, again, repeatable, obtainable, all those kinds of things. So,
yeah, we're in the maintenance phase, right? Like that's really where a lot of podcasts fall off. I remember hearing a statistic that I think it was like somewhere about 75% of podcasts just stop after episode 7. And so once we hit that mile marker, we were like, woohoo! And then we kept going and we kept delivering and producing episodes. We're now going to be hitting our 50th episode here pretty soon. And the real focus and in our shift in attention, like Bethany mentioned, has been in our processes. Like I was burnt out, frankly speaking. I was working up until midnight, 2 a.m, most nights, and just doing everything myself. I was the writer, the talent, the editor, the producer, the photographer, the videographer, the sound engineer, and it was too much. And so that was kind of where we made a big shift into, okay, let's open up the broader team, let's grow the team, and let's shift responsibility into some of our partners and into some of our, marketing team. We have 60 marketers here at PandaDoc. We're blessed with that. Let's have them be a part of the show just as much as Travis is. And so a couple of big things we also did, and our 5 tips for maintaining when you're in the maintenance phase of your show and you've got enough episodes underneath you, is it's been really important for us to track both the qualitative and the quantitative feedback that we're getting on the show. So qualitative, what does that look like? Bethany and I have a Slack channel where I screenshot every time me or the podcast gets mentioned about how amazing it is, or the impact it had on somebody, or the learning they had from it, or how fun it was for them, whatever it was. We screenshot each one of those because that qualitative feedback is sometimes more powerful than seeing the data itself, right? When we're able to show 15 different screenshots from last month to our executives during like how's the podcast, the state of podcast meeting doing? And they get to see things that people are writing and saying and the reaction we're giving them. That's incredibly powerful. The second part, like Bethany said, we've invested in our video filming and editing. We have a brand new studio. We rent out studio space. I'm not doing it in a weird like subterranean apartment anymore. We decided that was worth it for us to invest that and record it. And they just recorded the raw footage for us. They have a badass setup, and it's much easier for me to focus on interviewing my subjects, creating topics that are much more interesting for people. It takes the pressure off of me. As you've seen, I don't do well with all of this technology. It allows me to focus. And then establishing a realistic schedule. We went from kind of trying to attempt to, post an episode a week to really being strict about producing an episode a week, 3 to 4 teasers for each episode, and multiple social media posts. And then the quantitative, let me go back to that real quick. This is really important. We learned this one from Chris Walker. Shout out Refine Lab, shout out Todd Klauser. We added a drop-down field on our demo form where folks can select if they first heard about us from the podcast. And we're happy to say that 2% of all of the demos so far are people that have heard the podcast, which, hey, we're now on that little pie chart that the demand gen and revenue leaders at PandaDoc are looking at. And they're saying, hey, that's a new source of leads. Where's that coming from? So that was really cool for us. And then the last 2 things I want to just mention, I'll pass them off to Bethany, is like, it's really important to work as a team. And I couldn't have done this podcast at all. I wouldn't have had the success we wouldn't have had if I didn't have a team that was looking out for me and had my back. Like I said, I was burning out, and I was vocal about how stressed I was about this, silly show that was getting, 500-600 views, nothing crazy, per episode. But it was really important for me to get back my time. So Bethany, how do you protect your team's time?
It takes great organization skills, but I think it's also transparency with those folks on your team. I could tell, Travis is a very energetic person, and I could tell when he was feeling stressed or burned out. And so just checking in and making sure that he's doing okay, and then taking assessment of our production calendar, our content production, And I really had to take assessment of where Travis was spending his time and then where the other folks on my team were spending their time. I have a social media person and a copywriter on my team. And so we all put our heads together and just said, like, what are some ways that we can help Travis out here? And it doesn't take, we can build in an extra 20, 30 minutes to an hour, right? So listen to clips or like listen to the raw footage and help Travis kind of formulate the promo clips and the takeaways from each episode, and then write those up and make sure that all this kind of back end administrative stuff that happens around the show makes it easier for him and kind of taking that into consideration. So really just better managing our content production calendar, honestly. So
alrighty, guys, let's do really rapid fire Q&A sessions. I'm going to follow up on one thing you said. You said 25,000 downloads for the podcast, which is really great. Is that per month or per total?
Oh, man, I wish it was per month. That's total.
Got it. Then what do you insource? What do you outsource? Do you still outsource any part of it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the video content. Yeah, we have an agency that works with us to produce the video content for us. So Travis records it. They have our brand guide, style guide. They apply the colorful, fun animations to it, and we publish it. So yeah.
Question about differentiation. Everybody and their mother has an interview podcast because it's the easiest thing to produce. You need zero original thought. Just get a guy who knows something, right? You feature a bunch of guests too. I don't know if you do any solo episodes. So how is that different? Because the guests that you have, everybody else has the same guests. So
yeah, it's true. From the get-go, I remember hearing Udi from Gong when he was talking about how he started his podcast with Devin Reed. And he's like, we're not just going to start a podcast just to start one. There are so many out there, and they've been doing it twice as long as us. And I really adopted that mindset. And so I said, well, what's the unique thing that I can bring to this space? And what's, the unique offering? For me, in my free time, I was doing stand-up comedy and I was doing improv comedy and just being a goofball. Put my camera back on. And like at the end of the day, I was like, there's no business comedy content. Like not really. Sales Feed, and shout out to Mark Young, who you'll hear from in a little bit, was just getting off the ground. But there wasn't like long form comedy business content where you just go to have fun, something you could listen to while you're on your run or you're on your bicycle or you're at the gym, and you could just kind of laugh along and maybe learn a couple things as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Awesome. Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much, guys. Peace, everybody. Subscribe to their podcast and, find them on LinkedIn.
We'll get the resources to you guys too. So thank you so much for listening.
We'll email the slides later. All righty.